we have to develop this mutual trust of give and take. If the customization doesn't mean that you will not give ever, right? So with that assumption, what we are suggesting is this model of creating a container for every consumer, every downstream of the open source component. We would like them to give that, and once all of these containers, any commit that is happening, we also talked about, there was one of the barrier was there is no support and there is no guy who is maintaining the sanctity for the longer good. That statement is half true, half not true. If the originator of the open source component is there, moderating it till the end, it will be maintained, no questions. But most of the time, our interest wanes away. So after some point of time, I will say, no, I will move on to different thing. At the time, the design consistency of the source component or open source component weeds off. So in that scenario, without this kind of a framework, you will never be able to get a good quality support, whereas the component is keeping on changing, right? So that is where I am asking, let us develop this kind of a framework, GitHub's revision control, all that we have open source, all that thing we have done. All I am asking is, as a group, let us work towards creating such a container so that we solve validation efforts and bad code coming in. All those things are sorted out, and that way the executives will not have any issue in adopting the open source component. Because if you work in any enterprise today, if you have to get any open source component, the kind of approval flow you have to go through is huge because of licensing terms, because of the security risks, and each time you have to rev. Another thing is that if you have to improve, you first taking the open source component is tough. Incrementing the open source component is even tougher, because they'll say, what has happened? Has every change been vetted? Has there any been, how do you know that this is another point? How do you know that the contributor has not copied from a place where the license terms are even more restrictive, right? Because we have seen people enterprises creating clean rooms, redo the same code, read this code, write again. So stupid, right? But this is what is happening. And that is the reason why we are not able to see open source adoption the way we expect it to be. Because we don't want to be solving, all of the engineers, we don't want to be solving the same solved problem. But if you look at our software industry today, most of us are solving the same problem again, in a repeated manner in whatever our domain. We'll say, oh, we are different. It's like our movie director saying, my story is different. At the end, all will be happy ending, all the same story, right? So precisely to solve that, this is what I'm proposing, and this is my recommendation, and to say to our community, the open source community should come and actually create this framework and mandate for all the open source components. And this is on the community part. On the consuming part, we have to mandate that they have to give a container that we can run. And also, because the consuming team is getting the benefit of the open source component, they have to create the hardware layer or the data center layer where I can run this. Because as the open source components consumption grows up, the validation itself takes a lot of computing resources. That means the consuming team has to contribute in kind. Maybe it's the data center, maybe the power cost, all that has to be contributed, and that's what I'm pitching here. That's my talk. I just wanted to raise this because this is the open source conference. I wanted to see how we can increase and grow our community. Any questions?
It is basically like a test suite of this thing to validate the product, component actually. But sir, imagine you take a large component like a compiler or whatever it may be, then doing that job itself will take time for a consuming team basically. So because that is a big, because if I have to create a test suite for a compiler which I am going to use, That is an extra job for a consuming team. Actually.
So that's where there are two ways to address that, right? Are we saying that, let us take the compiler itself, we don't have a test suite for compiler? Are we saying that? We have something that anyway we are doing. Why I need container? Because your environment, I don't know which environment you are getting in. Are you not creating that environment? You are creating. All we are saying is take that piece of environment, reflect in the container, and then just give that. And take that piece of test suite out of that and you give that. So, in fact, we are not asking too much. All we are saying is whatever is the piece that is you are developing, anyway you are developing, without which anyway you can't publish your software. So, all we are saying is carve out that piece. Yes, there is an effort in carving that out. I am not disputing that. All I am saying is that is even lesser effort compared to the amount of effort you spend each time a release note comes. I know how we write the release notes, right? Nothing is seen. And another ask I forgot to highlight, how do I know between two releases of open source component whether the API that I am using is actually affected? That's an easy problem to solve. When I say easy problem to solve, each API I can go back to which line, all the lines that are affected, and anytime there is a commit on that, I know that. So that's an easy problem to solve. That I am saying our open source community will anyway do it. All I am saying is whatever is test suite you have, whatever is the environment you have, make yourself visible to the contributor in a way that can be enforced. That's all I am asking. Yes. So every open source component, when you finally implement this, every open source component, Jet repository or whatever repository you have, should also have the container, consuming container repository, right? And anytime a check-in commit comes, check-in comes, the check-in will trigger all these containers to run, and only when all of them return, it's actually committed to your master. So that way, things are streamlined. You don't have to worry about that. I broke this and then this huge tussle. I will not accept. Your moderator will also say, right? And most of the time, when I'm committing, if moderator says this is not the correct one, you get hurt. But now, if you have a parameterized container is not running, some of these use cases are not running, then you know the answer. You don't have to be subjective. This is a very objective way of saying my component is used in all these variants. Maybe I should not let this commitment happen.
So then we are proposing like a consumer community, like now we can say like it is an open source developer community.
Yes.
So whatever you are proposing is like
Yes.
a open source consumer community.
Yes, exactly.
So what you are proposing is like okay, the consumer community has to create a container. For example,
Yep.
if I am going to use something called MySQL, okay, open source. So that consumer community has to create a container, and all their test case and their expectation should be there in the container, right?
Yes.
So before I am going to implement in my product, the consumer community has to certify that release.
Yes.
So,
when
you are creating that bridge.
yes,
Am I
so,
right?
Yes.
So even though they are releasing a version like 9.0, so that has to certify in this consumer community, so
Yes.
that I can take it into my
Yes.
product, and I can avoid that n number
Yeah.
of test shoot in my
Yes.
product.
So most of the time, if you are in enterprise world also, let us look at it a very restrictive problem. In enterprise also, in any large enterprise, you have shared components. Let's stop the open source for a moment. You look at the shared component. You go and talk to any shared component developer, asking, "Can I change this line?" Most of the time is they say, "I don't know," because I don't know who my customer is, who my consumer is. In enterprise also this is a problem. But if we can come up with this framework, this is a suggestion I am saying. All of your bright minds might come up with a different suggestion. I am open for that. But all I am suggesting is this is one possible way of doing it. And once you have a consumer list, and also it gives you motivation. If you look at from a developer, if I know that this many people are consuming, it gives me a kick. And also to say how much rigor I need to have to start with. My first comment said it is a side project, that's why you are leveraging. No, that's not that. So when an executive is looking at it, you are saying, by the way, this many people are consuming. Your job is easier to convince somebody to adopt. And also as a developer, you can seek something to say, I have contributed to that. So that's where I'm talking about open source consumer. For every component, you need to have a consuming community, and there should be a way to tie work in both sides. That's what I'm saying.
Do we have any other community like existing?
I'm not aware. So that's where I'm saying this seem to be two different worlds. Even the enterprise class open source components that we are talking about are mostly contributed by the corporate guys, right? It's not a true open source that way. And the reason, and also when you go to this, because it is contributed by the corporate guys, obviously the moderator is from corporate. I will not let your check-in go till it satisfies my product requirements. You have seen these tussles also. That means the motive with which we started is no longer relevant, and we are lost it. So that's where I am suggesting you should have this kind of a framework in a true spirit of democracy and true spirit of openness, and so that we can advance ourselves to solve the advanced problems rather than the same problem fighting it out amongst ourselves.
Yeah, thank you.
Solution may be is good, because the validation is basically a one-time affair actually. But sir, actually your component will be in another system embedded, and that there will be changes in the system, and correspondingly this component also may undergo some changes actually. So basically you again go into a regression of the validation basically. So that cycle only is, again I will have to do, because it's basically if you change the software, I will have to change my test set of suits.
So let me answer that. When you are evolving any software from 1.0, right? Most of the time when you started, you need not develop the container yourself. Let me qualify that statement. When you start using a component, you are taking the component as is. That is the basic reason why you pitched in, saying it saved me some effort. That's why I'm taking. Where you will get your environment, right? Most of the time your environment will be standards, you will be getting there. Starting is easy, right? But we are talking about the next part. By that time you would have anyway developed your test suite, right? That is taken into consideration. That's why you will never get that. But if you are thinking that, oh, before starting test driven development, I will develop the test suite, we are not talking about that. We are talking about the open source component. I know this many people have used in this context. I'll take that benefit and then we'll start. Today, if you are taking the open source component, there is no guarantee that in your environment it works. Now with this community, you get a benefit that this has been already validated. This many number of people are using it. So it gives you comfort. Actually, you are advancing much better rather than saying that I will wait. I have to wait till my test suite is developed. That's not the idea. So you will come to the as is customer first, or a customer set that have used in a specific environment. Yes. Yes. So one of the barrier. Yes. 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 So one of the barrier, if you see, one of the open source barrier is the certification support. Now with this consuming community that I'm proposing, we actually get that also. So that will increase our adoption much better, and we as a human community can actually advance much better. That is the reason I am suggesting this.
When something in some component is available, actually, people, normally they certify, sir, like, if you take softwares, they certify, this environment, this thing. I think that could have been done even otherwise also. That's what.
This is the main problem. I did that only I will do, otherwise I won't. That is number one. Number two, we are commercial. Let's be realistic. Our salary comes from my product. My product, I don't want to tell the little secret sauce to you. Even if you take any product, whatever way you say, we'll say we open source it, we will open source 2 versions down. 2 versions up ahead in your commercial environment, you are there. So if all the people are generous and open, we will not get into this problem. The fact that we got into shows that we are not. Now, if I start saying, hey, world is bad, people are not open, people are not transparent, I will not get anywhere. So this is another way of attempting saying that we can get around this problem by adopting this kind of a framework. That's what I'm trying to suggest. This is one attempt.
That will also help whenever we are moving from version x.y to x.z.
Yes, conformance test, but the game there is playing at a different level. I can tell you that. Because I am very closely involved with that standard. The fights happen in the standard level. Right? They don't even let you put a small construct also. They'll say, no, my company doesn't own it, so I am sponsoring this standard, so I will not give you. So standards game is very political, that's not open. But you're right, our ideas also came from that conformance only, by saying that if you look at any standard today, they always publish this many number of companies have actually adopted, right? Why can't I do the same thing with open source is all I'm trying to say.
So most of the issue I faced was like I was searching for a log ingestion tool. So there are multiple products available. We have logs test, we have stream sets, and just I was thinking like which would be better for my use case, and I would just look into which companies have adopted, but no sense on what was the exact sense, what was the exact environment or the particular problem they have adopted for. So this particular framework will also helpful for product selection as well in the open source community.
Thank you. So that is the idea, because today in regular world, park the open source for a moment, we say information is available. Google is there everywhere. But how do you know that the answer the Google is fetching is correct? And because of that, we elected somebody whom we did not want to, right? So the same thing will happen for our open source. So you're right. That is the reason. This is the sheer frustration of working in enterprise and the kind of open source questions we keep getting in. That's why, though I suggested a different topic to start with, I thought maybe this is the question I can raise, and maybe I can find like-minded people to start this framework. And then once we develop one or two components, the rest of the community can look at this and then make it a standardized practice. Maybe it can become a W3 standard for open source component, and then we'll say open source component certified or compliant to W3C open source standards. That will be the best we can get. Opportunities are immense. I am excited, but what I am asking here is a community that we can develop.